Welcome to the channel, everybody. This is a bit of a special one. I've been reached out to by, I can't mention any names, can't mention the company, can't mention, yeah, it's like a James Bond thing. If I told you, I'd have to kill you. But I've been reached out to on social media and I've been asked to try some paint that is not yet available in the UK. Now, I don't want to pinpoint the country that this paint's come from. All I'm going to say, it is in the EU, it is in Europe, and it is a European paint. Now, I've been asked to try this paint out for an honest opinion because I don't do videos where I'm going to tell you a paint is fantastic if I don't think it is fantastic. You see a paper motion in the corner, that's all to do with, well, it's that corner. You see a paper motion in the corner, that's to do with my Amazon associate account that you can purchase things from the Amazon storefront, but that is nothing to do with people supplying me to try to have a go with paints that they've got that they think I might be interested in. So today I've got a paint that somebody's reached out to me and said, Phil, give it a go. It's a water-based paint. I think you'll like it, but I need an honest opinion. You're going to get that with me. Now, I don't want to show you too much of the label of the tin because I don't want to give a name out for what this product is. But what I can tell you, it's hiding it. It's a water-based product. It's the usual. 2 hours recoat time. Covering the label, but it's the usual. It's a water-based paint. It's a full acrylic water-based paint. I'll put it down, it's heavy. 1 to 2 hours, touch dry. Recoat time, they recommend around about 6 hours, and I've been told about 48 hours for it to cure. To be on the safe side, I normally say to a customer, if we've used water-based paint, give it 5 days to 7 days. If it's a paint that I actually know that is longer than that, I do tell customers it might be a 30-day fully cure time. But this paint that I'm going to be trialling on Doris the Door, we've got Dave there. He's taking a back seat today. We've got Doris the Door. I'm going to be trying it out on here. Now, this paint can go over previously painted surfaces, whether it be water-based or a gloss oil-based surface. Do what you normally do, give it a good rub down, give it a dust off. If you feel the need for a tack rag, which I've got down there, please give a tack rag over the surface as well. But if you have got colour changes of a dark colour to a white like what we've got, I would be telling you, and manufacturers would be telling you, to use an undercoat stroke primer to build that surface up without using the top coat paint, wasting it, if that makes sense. So what you do is you put your primer stroke undercoat on to try and obliterate the darker colours underneath. Now, this paint is quite good for that. You can actually use any of your well-known, I don't like this word go-to, but if you've got a decent primer stroke undercoat that you use that you know works, whether it be a grit primer or whether it be one of these undercoats that has an adhesion property to it, please use that first. But for the purposes of this video, I've got a well rubbed down, sanded down Doris the Door. We've got some darker colours of previous paint that's coming through, which for me, this is going to be a good test because we've got white areas and we've got dark areas. This will show me what this paint is like for opacity to cover things that might show through on woodwork that you might be coming up to on a job. We're not going in with a pure, perfect, smooth, I say smooth, and even covered surface being a blanked out white door. I don't want that. I want to test this paint to see what its opacity is like. But what I will be doing, I'll be testing this paint. I'll see what it's like. I've got it out. I've already got it in my tin. I've already sniffed the bristle. And you know what bristle it is because I'm using the same brush for every paint that I try and trial. It's the Heritage from Knorr. I'm sniffing the bristle. That has got a proper ammonia nappy bucket smell, which is more of a characteristic to have for a fully acrylic based paint. If you've got a hybrid paint, you would probably notice that there is an element of a smell of something else to it because there's a touch of oil. But this has proper got an ammonia smell, which, yeah, that tells me it's classed as a water-based acrylic paint, 100%. Right, I'm just see if I've missed anything off. It's a low VOC, it's the usual. It is water-based, so your thinner is water. If you are spraying it or even needing it for rolling, that you might want to add a little bit of water. It could be 10 to 20%. It depends. This is a satin finish. I'll make that clear. This is a satin finish. It's actually classed as an enamel finish, which if a lot of people, if you say enamel, you think of more of the oil-based sorts of paints. But this is a white satin, and I'm going in, doing Doris the door as I normally do. I'm starting with the mouldings and I'm working down. Now, I'll do majority of this door and I'll talk to you while I'm doing it. And then I will let this dry for easily 6 to 10 stroke, maybe come back the next day to give it a second coat and we'll see what it's like, because we want to give it a fair crack at the whip. I will also be giving it a bit of a, if I remember, please remind me, I'll do a bit of a nail scratch test to it after it's had that first coat on and it's dried, and we'll see what it's like for that initial going off and being hard. But let's see. When I mixed it up, really nice consistency. It didn't feel too thick, didn't feel too thin. It felt a nice, soft paint to be mixing up, if that makes sense. I don't know. Right, as I say, I've dusted off. I'm going in now, and that feels very, very thin to apply. That's not a bad thing. Some of the paints that I do try and do tests on in that, if you look in that list there, seem a bit thick and you need to add a little bit of water to it. This is one of those ones that feels very, very nice to apply, i.e. easy. Right, we've got some marker pen there, which previously I've had some stain blocker across it, the Smith & Rogers, to block it out. Right, I'm just knocking off these fatty edges, wiping my kettle down, wiping my brush down on the kettle, sorry. Knocking off these fatty edges around the side so they can dry off, and I'm just looking at that. It looks all right, it looks all right. We can't judge a book by its cover. We've got to read every chapter. So we're going in again. We've got some colours on this door that are showing through where it's yellowed off, where it's been previously hybrid paints that have been white and they've gone off on me quite quickly. We've gone quiet. It's actually a very nice paint to apply. I'm looking, yeah, we're looking all right. So far, so good. Now, I've not added anything to this paint. It is literally straight out the tub. It's had no conditioners to it. It's no water. I've gone quiet. It's, I'm not saying I've got a bit of bubbling up. It might be just... I'm just looking. I'm just doing a quick look. Right. Getting it on. There seems to be a nice open working time with it to get a panel like that done. Yeah, we're all right so far. People say to me, why do you do a panel door like this? Why don't you trial it in a room? Well, a panel door is probably one of your substrate stroke surfaces that takes a bit of skill to do. You've got to do your mouldings, you've got to do the flats, the panels, and then you've got to come and do your stiles, your rails and bits and pieces like that. You've got a lot of working to do with paint on a door like this, so it gives a good indication on how a paint's actually feeling and applying, and also what it looks like, because you're going to get bristles that touch the surface and maybe flash what you've already painted. If you don't know what flashing is, it's not that bloke at the school gates, yeah, back in days of old. Right, I'm just going to drop down. Coming down here. My studio workshop has got a heater on. You can probably just hear it in the background, just keeping the air warm so we're not in a cold environment. Now, you might have seen on a playlist, I've used another European paint before from Portugal. Now, this paint isn't from Portugal, but the Portuguese paint was Satin. Now, I said that that paint was the best paint I've ever used, and it's not available in the UK. Now, we're finding a lot of paints that are coming over to the UK knock spots off a lot of the paints that we've actually got in the UK already. Now, I don't know why that is. I know weather conditions over in Europe are probably warmer than what we get, and we've got some funny weather in the UK at the moment. Right, I'm going to go off camera now. I'm going to get the rest of the door coated up, and I will come back when it's dry and I'll have a look at it. So I don't want to bore you too much, but so far I'm finding this has actually applied really nicely. It feels a thin paint to apply, which, as I've said before, isn't a bad thing, but will it have the opacity in the body that we're requiring if we're doing a 2-coat job? Not sure. See you in a bit. Right, my followers of the channel, it's been now, I'd say, 8.5 hours since I actually coated that up. I will say the application of that was lovely. It went on really nice. Opacity, which I'm trying to probably push the boundary. I'm not expecting whites. Whites are always a bit of a nasty one to cover over these dark areas. You see where it's been rubbed through before. Let me bring the door down if I can. I don't know whether you can see it. So on that note, opacity is a little bit poor at this moment in time, that first coat. Some of the paints that I've tried before have a little bit more body to them on opacity. Some aren't much different to this. But what I would say is how that applied and how that has dried out, I can't see any brush marks. The flow of that is really quite good. No, there's not much to that. What I'm going to do now, I washed the brush out, and with it being a pure 100% acrylic, it washed out really nicely. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get another coat on that and let that dry off overnight, because we're coming into early evening. I'm going to let that dry off overnight, and then I'll reassess it in the morning, and quite possibly I'll give it a third coat to see what the opacity is like if it's not covered as well as I'd like to. But I think I'm probably asking a bit too much to cover things like that. But that said, what would 3 coats be like? We will try it. So have a good evening, everybody, and I will see you first thing in the morning. Right, the dedicated followers of the channel that's interested in this new paint that I'm trying out, that I can't tell you what it's going to be called, I can't tell you who's importing it, I can't tell you anything about it. All I'm doing is actually trialling it, testing it out. I'm going to give feedback, and the guy that's sorting all this paint out is going to be very interested in this video because it's my feedback. But I'm here the next day, we've got 2 coats on, and I'm going to tell you my initial thoughts. Right, so my initial thoughts. I've wrote some notes because I'll probably forget everything. Now this paint, as I keep saying, I can't tell you what it is. I can't show you the labels, can't tell you what it's called. But this is a satin finish that is 100%, I'm told, 100% acrylic, water-based, and good to go. I take it you can use it inside and out, with it being that acrylic water-based, and it is a satin enamel, which normally means you can use those sorts of paints outside. But we went over Doris the Door that had been sanded down, and you know how many coats of paint Doris the Door's had. We'd got dark areas coming through from darker colours that were still showing. That to me is a good test because we are going over areas that were white and also the darker greys and the greens that were coming through. This gives the good test for showing you what the opacity of this paint's like. Now that first coat went on very thin. It feels like a thin, cheaper paint. It doesn't seem to have body to it. It doesn't feel like you're fighting it. It went on thin. The opacity, it didn't cover brilliantly over these darker areas, and I'll bring you in on the camera in a little while, but we're stuck with it. I applied it. Now let me just check my notes because I remember when I was putting it on, it felt, and I've used it and I've probably might have said it, it felt foamy. Now I'm not saying it felt like, you know, if you put a spot of fairy liquid into your paint and as you were applying it you're just getting a little bit of a bubble getting activated, like you'd whisked up a bit of egg white. It was just a little bit foamy like that. I don't know whether that actually helps applying it or whether it's a good or bad thing. It's not a problem when it's dried, because if you look at how that's dried, there's no issues there at all. It's not created bubbles on the surface. It's obviously settled out. Now the settling out of this, I've got no runs and I've got no creeps, and you'll know the paints that I probably don't like so much because give it 10-15 minutes you've got creeps on these edges, or you might get a bit of a sag run somewhere. It's none of that. It went on really smooth and easily. And again, is that because it's got a bit of a foamy element to it? I'm not sure. But let me get the natural light coming in, and we've got the ring light there. The finish, the satin finish. It's a better satin finish than some of the other paints that I tried that say they satin and actually dull off to more of an eggshell finish. It doesn't feel a dry finish. Now, some of the paints that I use and I like, again, say they're a satin finish, but actually you touch them and they don't feel like they've got a finish to it, if that makes sense. They feel flatter. Not so much of a matte finish, but a less on the percentage of what your satin would be. Now, I would class a satin finish from your 30% of like a Helmi 30, Everlacquer 40, round about that sort of grading. Round about that 40% is a nice sheen level. If I was talking about Benjamin Moore Scuffex, that goes on quite thinly. That flows out nicely, and the finish of that I always refer it to, and I'm just looking behind the camera, that feels like a UPVC finish. That's got a satiny finish that feels like what the old, and I've said before in other videos, Sikkens BL. That is probably around about a 35 to 40% finish. It's nice, it feels like you've actually got something on the surface. This paint also, I can see it, it looks quite sheeny across it, and finish wise it doesn't feel too dry at all, so that's a good thing. Right, looking back on my notes, let's just talk about that opacity, coverage, opacity. Where I've got the darker areas that were where we were rubbed through, that second coat has actually covered quite nicely over it, to the point that I would say if you were going over a colour or a door that's got areas that were showing through darker colours, I would advise to put an undercoat on first. Now, this doesn't come with a specific undercoat as this brand of paint, but if you use the universal undercoat, say something like, I don't know, a Zinza 123, a Zinza 123 plus, a Zinza Aqua bin, something water-based that gives you an undercoat property, stroke primer, also give you a grip coat, it'll also give you a grip coat adhesion property as well. You could use those sorts of paint, and other brands are available that can be used with other, not hand in glove paints, so other paints that could go over the top. Use an undercoat primer first to blank out any of those specific areas. Don't just go spot priming, do the whole door. I would say do the whole door in an undercoat first, then put your two coats of this over the top. And I think those areas, as long as your undercoat has got body to it that will help obliterate, and I'll say obliterate, to lose and disguise these areas, I can see them because I know where they are. Areas up here, bring you up a little bit. Areas up here that were showing through the dark. That with 2 coats doesn't look bad, but do you know what I'm going to do after I've spoke to you? I'm going to give it a 3rd coat to see if it makes much difference. But opacity on that 2nd coat is greatly improved over the 1st. So that's another good point about it. Right, the drying times. I would say with me doing this in here with a bit of heat on, that was probably gone off and touch dry within about 30 minutes. So that hour to 2 hours touch dry easily, if not less. I would even say that you could probably recoat after about 4 hours quite nicely without any issues. I was well into 6, 7, 8 hours doing that 2nd coat yesterday. So all in all, that we've got some good properties. I've spoke about the touch dry, spoke about the finish, I've spoke about no runs, the foaming element to it, only slightly, and I'm going to say the only negative about this being such a thin paint, and if I'd got a door that was probably flush, and if you use the wrong sort of sandpaper, i.e. too coarse, i.e. something like an 80, and you put scratches over a surface, a characteristic with some and quite a few water-based paints is there's not enough body in the makeup of the paint to lose scratches on surfaces if you've rubbed over sanded the surface. My only negative with this paint would be it does feel very thin to apply, and has it got body to give guts to that layer of paint that goes over a surface that might be showing sanding marks on it. Now if you sanded down with something that was a well-worn 120 wet and dry, or even a 120 general sandpaper, you know, this sort of stuff, if it's fine and you've rubbed it down, probably no problems. If you've got these Merca Gold Flex pads just nibbing the surface down, probably no problem. No problem whatsoever. You won't be putting scratches in it. But I think probably with it being a little bit thinner, just be aware that you might get things showing through. It's not going to hide anything. Right, this has had 2 coats, as you know. It's been on, what, 15, 16 hours. I'm just going to go with a sharp edge of this can opener. If I press hard, I can just start scraping a bit of the surface away. Now curing time is 48 hours, and I would actually err on the side of caution and say 5 to 7 days. So I am asking a lot where I'm scratching that surface off, and I can put a bit of pressure on and move it. But I think if it was a general knocking it and banging it, you quite possibly would be good with that. I'm just going to get a wipe and let's just see if it wipes back into the shot. I've just got those like big man wipes, it's ultra wipes. Right, this is a damp wipe that gets anything. Can I wipe these marks off? Those scuff marks of the metalwork. No, I'm probably struggling with that. Let's get me just a dry one. I'm probably struggling to get those off. So it's a hard surface per se, but it does mark with metal scuffs, which I've done before, haven't I, with a coin, and we've been able to wipe off stuff. That is probably asking a lot, but it's not come off. Right, let me just dry that with a bit of a cloth. We're not too bad. So to sum it up, I quite like the paint. I'd like for that, for your own peace of mind, I would like to see that this would be a little bit more thicker to apply with the ease of the application that it's got now, if that makes sense. But on the whole, I don't think there's any problem with that paint at all. It's one of those paints that you've got to try it yourself to get a feel for it. If you're used to your thicker paints, like applying, I'm just looking what I've got down here. Let's say the AquaGuard, that's a thick paint. If you talk about the Heritage, they feel thicker paints to apply. They have nice sheen levels as well. This isn't the same thickness of paint application. You'd probably find it sprays very nice because you'd be adding very little water to it, but for a brush application it is a little bit unnerving to actually think that I'm putting on something that's a little bit thinned down more than something that's got body and actually guts to it. But that said, not a bad finish. It flows out nicely. The application, the brush marks, I'm not seeing any brush marks staying on the surface. It has actually flowed out nicely. And on that note, I know this has probably been a bit of a long video about talking about the paint, but I think that paint's not bad at all. And I'm going to do another coat now and just finish off at the end of the video to say how it's actually covered over all these. But no, quite impressed. Watch this space for when this gets released, and hopefully somebody will reach out to me at the time that this gets released and say, Phil, we've either tweaked it or we've gone with it, which is fine. Can you let everybody know? And we'll test it again and we'll do another video on it. So all in all, I'm going to get another coat on now and we'll see what that third coat's like, because it does need it. It does need it. But if you'd put an undercoat on first that's got body to it, probably not. Don't forget, colours will be a different kettle of fish to what a white paint is. Right, we're back. I've actually gave it that third coat to see what it was like for the opacity. I've still got areas up there that are a little bit dark shadowing. We know it's not going to cover over those marks that were there that we did after the second coat, scratch testing it. But on the whole, I would actually say the finish is actually a nice finish. You can just see that sheen level with the ring light picking up on that. So finish wise, I'm quite happy with. I have to say it's interesting when I did that third coat. It's not, when I say I've made the notes, like it's foamy to apply. It's not so much foamy, it's a bit of a bubble to it when you're applying it. Now, getting to the bottom of the door, where I'd got a heater on near the ground level, where it got bubbles, it was drying that a little bit too quick, and probably the bubbles weren't bursting and they were still on the surface. So by the time I tried to lay it off, I'd still got a little bit of bubble showing there. It's a little bit textured, it's not too bad, but that was because the heat was on. But I do have to say, the laying off of this for the flow is pretty good. Even where you've got, where you'd be joining up, you know, when you come down on your members there and then coming across on your rails and your stiles, the open time of the paint's good. It's not drying off on you like some paints that have tested seem to dry off on you when you come down these areas and then float across to try and lose them out. We've not had any of that. Same again around the tops of the mouldings, no issue there with flashing because the edges have dried off. So on the whole, pretty impressed paint. What I would say is it needs a decent primer stroke undercoat as a first coat if you are going over something that isn't a solid all white, because these areas up here around there where we'd rub through to get some dark colours coming through haven't covered with that two coats. And the scenario would be if you've got your cleaner going around with a vacuum cleaner and they're catching your skirting boards and leaving it, call it a tide mark going all the way around. If there's a black rubber mark going round that you can't sand off and it still leaves a shadow, there's going to be an issue for the opacity stroke the coverage over that. Hence why you might want to use, I'm looking down what I've got, a decent quality primer stroke undercoat to blank those out before you start putting your top coats on. But all in all, thanks for listening. It's been a long one, but it's been an interesting one to try something different, and please watch the videos at the end. Once again, people are giving me super thanks, much appreciated, and people buying me a coffee, I love it, thank you.